It is a bitter December night, somewhere in medieval Europe. The harvest has long been gathered. The earth is frozen solid, and the darkness falls early. You are in your home. The doors barred, the fire dying down to embers. The silence of the winter forest outside is absolute. And then you hear it. It doesn't come from the tree line. It comes from above, a sound that freezes the blood in your veins. First, the distant baying of hounds, not normal dogs, but a shrieking, rhythmic howl that echoes across the clouds. Then comes the thunder of hooves, thousands of them, striking the winter wind as if it were solid ground. Finally, the piercing blast of a hunting horn that rattles the wooden beams of your roof. You do not look out the window. You do not open the door. You grab your children, pull them to the dirt floor, and press your face into the dust. You pray to whatever God you believe in that the riders do not stop at your house, because if you look up, you will see them, and if you see them, you belong to them. This was the terror of the wild hunt. For centuries, across the damp moors of England, the black forests of Germany, and the frozen fjords of Scandinavia, our ancestors shared a collective nightmare. The wild hunt wasn't just a campfire story to frighten children. It was treated as a documented meteorological fact. It was a spectral procession of hunters, horses, and hounds tearing across the night sky, trampling anything and anyone foolish enough to cross its path. To the modern mind, safely insulated by electric lights and central heating. A winter storm is just weather, a drop in barometric pressure, wind moving through the branches. But imagine facing the raw, unfiltered violence of a winter gale in the 12th century. The sheer, overwhelming power of the elements felt intentional. It felt like an attack. The people of the past needed a way to process the arbitrary cruelty of nature. When a sudden storm wiped out a village, or a traveler vanished in the snow, it wasn't just bad luck. It was the hunt. They had been swept up by the phantom riders. This mythology tapped into a primal, universal fear, the realization that humanity is not at the top of the food chain. There are ancient, uncontrollable forces operating just beyond the veil of our reality, forces that do not care about our borders, our kings, or our prayers. The riders were not angels, and in the beginning, they were not demons either. They were something much older. They were the physical embodiment of chaos, a reminder that order and civilization are fragile illusions. In a time when life was short and brutal, the wild hunt represented the sudden, violent arrival of death. You couldn't fight it. You couldn't outrun it. Your only hope was to hide and wait for the terrible procession to pass. But as we will see, hiding wasn't always enough. The hunt was always searching for new souls to join its eternal ride. And the leader of this phantom army was a figure whose name alone commanded absolute terror. Who commands the sky? If you ask a Christian in the Middle Ages, they would say God. But the people of Northern Europe remembered an older master. Long before the church bells rang across the continent, the dark winter months belonged to him. He was the All-Father, the gallows god, the Lord of Frenzy, Odin. In Germanic lands, they called him Warden, and he was the original, undisputed master of the wild hunt. Today, pop culture has sanitized Odin. We picture a wise, grandfatherly king sitting on a golden throne in Asgard, but the ancient Germanic tribes knew a very different deity. There, Odin was terrifying. He was a god of war, poetry, madness, and death. He was a wanderer who sacrificed his own eye for forbidden knowledge and hung himself from the world tree for 9 days to learn the secrets of magic. He was not a god of peace. He was a god of the storm, and during the darkest, coldest nights of the year, he mounted his 8-legged steed and rode out at the head of a massive, supernatural army. This army was made up of the Einherjar, the spirits of dead warriors who had fallen in battle. They rode through the sky in a furious cavalcade, their armor clashing like thunder, their weapons flashing like lightning. For the early pagan tribes, witnessing the hunt was an omen of impending war or plague. But it was also a majestic display of their god's raw power. But history is written by the victors. As Christianity swept across Europe, The old gods were systematically The church could not completely erase the deeply ingrained belief in the wild hunt, so they rebranded it. Odin was stripped of his divine status. The wise, terrifying All-Father was transformed into a demonic figure. A restless ghost condemned to ride the skies as punishment. The glorious army of fallen heroes was rewritten as a parade of the damned, thieves, and unbaptized children, forced to run endlessly through the dark. The hunt was no longer a sacred, if terrifying, natural event. It became a moral warning. It was a rolling, airborne hell. Yet, despite the church's best efforts, the old fear remained. People still called it Woden's Hunt in secret. They remembered that the man leading the charge wore a wide-brimmed hat, cloaked in gray, missing an eye, and carrying a spear that never missed its mark. He was the storm incarnate, and even as he was pushed into the shadows of folklore, he never truly stopped riding. He just became darker, hungrier, and more resentful of the humans who had forgotten him. When the wind howled down the chimney, the peasants knew it wasn't just the air shifting. It was the old god, furious and untamed, looking for those who had abandoned him. Every hunter needs his dogs, and the master of the wild hunt commands the most terrifying pack ever conceived by human imagination. Long before you saw the riders, long before you saw the phantom horses, you would hear the dogs. They were the heralds of doom, the outriders of the storm. Across Europe, they had many names. The Gabriel hounds in England, the Yeth hounds in Devon, and the Cŵn Annwn in Wales. These were not ordinary animals. The folklore of the Cŵn Annwn, the hounds of the Welsh underworld, paints a chilling picture. They were massive, muscular beasts, their fur blindingly white, representing the paleness of death, but their ears were stained a deep blood red. This combination of white and red is universally recognized in Celtic mythology as the colors of the supernatural, the colors of things that do not belong in our world. The most disturbing thing about these phantom dogs was how they sounded. If a normal dog barks, the sound gets louder as it gets closer. The hounds of the wild hunt operate on a terrifying reverse logic. When their shrieking howl sounded like it was right next to your ear, deafening and immediate, it meant the dogs were actually miles away. But when the howl grew faint, distant, and soft like a whisper on the wind, that meant they were right behind you. Their breath was already on your neck. They were the trackers of the damned. In the Christianized versions of the myth, these hounds were specifically sent to hunt down the souls of the wicked who had managed to escape hell, or to snatch up the souls of unbaptized infants. But in the older traditions, the hounds didn't care about human morality. They hunted because it was their nature. They chased the souls of the dead, sweeping them up into the chaotic procession, adding their terrified screams to the cacophony of the hunt. Seeing a fairy dog was a guaranteed death sentence. If a lone traveler walking the moors at night spotted a glowing, redded hound staring at them from the mist, it meant their time was up. They wouldn't be mauled to death. The dogs rarely touched their victims physically. The sheer, overwhelming terror of making eye contact with a creature from the abyss was enough to stop a human heart. People would be found the next morning, dead on the road, without a single scratch on them, their faces frozen in masks of absolute agony. They had been hunted to death by fear itself. The hounds are the primal anxiety of being prey, a genetic memory from when early humans were hunted by wolves in the dark, elevated into a nightmare that haunted the European psyche for 1,000 years. Not every spectral army in the sky was led by a one-eyed Norse god. If you traveled west, leaving the frozen fjords and entering the deep, ancient oak forests of England, the wild hunt took on a far more visceral, earthly terror. Here, beneath the twisting canopy of Windsor Forest, the locals did not fear a god of war. They feared a creature that blurred the line between humanity and the primordial wild. They feared Herne, the hunter. To encounter Herne was to look into the abyss of pagan antiquity. He was described not as a king in shining armor, but as a towering figure of a man bearing the massive, velvet-covered antlers of a great stag upon his head. He rode a skeletal black horse, his face shadowed by the twisting horns, and he carried a haunting, mournful horn. Unlike the thundering, martial cacophony of Odin's host, Herne's approach was often signaled by the heavy, metallic clinking of rusted chains dragging across the forest floor, accompanied by the low, guttural growls of his demonic hounds. He was a localized nightmare, a guardian of the deep woods where the laws of the king and the light of the church simply did not exist. The official, sanitized folklore claims that Herne was once a mortal manna royal huntsman for King Richard II, who committed a grave offense, or perhaps was framed by his jealous peers. In despair, he hanged himself from the branches of a massive oak tree in the heart of Windsor. But the common folk knew this was a polite fiction. You do not become a horned master of spirits simply by dying. Historians and mythologists recognize Herne as a surviving fragment of something much older. Cŵn, the ancient Celtic horned god of nature, beasts, and the underworld. When the new religion built its cathedrals and paved its roads, it tried to banish the horned god, literally turning his image into the template for the Christian devil. But the forest remembers, Herne is the manifestation of nature's vengeance against the encroaching civilization. He did not lead a grand army of fallen heroes. His wild hunt was a desperate, angry mob of restless spirits, cursed souls, and the ghosts of poached animals. He rode to punish those who disrespected the woodland, to spread blight among the cattle, and to remind the villagers that the forest was not their property. It was a breathing, hostile entity, and he was its crowned king. The psychological terror of Herne lies in his corruption of the human form. He represents the beast that lives inside the civilized man, the primitive urge to hunt tous et blood and to run wild in the dark. To see the Antlered King was to realize how thin the veneer of human society truly is. You might lock your door and sit by the hearth, but out there, in the pitch-black labyrinth of the ancient oaks, the wild was awake, it was angry, and it was rattling its chains. What actually happens if you make the mistake of looking? In most modern ghost stories, a specter simply wants to frighten you or perhaps deliver a message. But the wild hunt had no interest in your terror. It wanted your soul. The most horrifying aspect of the hunt was not its grotesque appearance, but its infectious, magnetic pull. It was a supernatural draft, and if you were caught out in the open, or if you dared to open your shutters to watch the procession pass, you were immediately conscripted into the army of the dead. This phenomenon was known as the frenzy. In Germanic traditions, the root word for this ecstatic, uncontrollable rage is the same root that gives us the name Odin. The hunt was a rolling storm of what, if a mortal man looked the leader in the eye, he would be instantly stripped of his free will. His feet would lift from the frozen dirt. His mind would empty of all memories of his family, his home, and his life, and he would be consumed by an overwhelming, euphoric bliss. He would join the screaming horde, running across the sky, his voice adding to the terrifying cacophony echoing over the valleys. He became just another shadow in the storm. But the horror of abduction took an even more insidious form. You didn't necessarily have to be outside to be taken. Across medieval Europe, there are chilling trial records and folklore accounts of a phenomenon that resembles mass astral projection. During the darkest nights of winter, usually around the 12 days of Christmas, people would fall into a sudden, deep catatonic trance in their own beds. Their bodies would remain cold and unresponsive, breathing shallowly, while their souls were violently ripped from their physical forms to ride with the hunt. Imagine the terror of a medieval spouse, watching their husband or wife slip into a death-like coma as the wind howled outside, knowing exactly where their spirit had gone. When these sleepers finally woke, days later, they were often exhausted, their bodies battered and bruised as if they had physically run for hundreds of miles. They would whisper fragmented, nightmarish memories of flying over mountains, hunting monstrous beasts, and riding alongside the routing corpses of their ancestors. The wild hunt destroyed the concept of the individual. It was a collective, chaotic hive mind of the dead. The fear was that your neighbor, the quiet baker, or the pious farmer, might secretly be a phantom rider in the night. It suggested that our souls are not anchored to our bodies by the grace of God, but can be snatched away by a passing storm, leaving behind an empty, breathing shell. The hunt didn't just kill you. It erased your humanity and forced you to participate in its eternal, agonizing chase. Timing is everything in folklore. The wild hunt did not ride in the bright, warm months of summer. It was exclusively a phenomenon of the bitter dark. Its peak activity was tied to the winter solstice, the time known to the pagans as youth, and later Christianized into the 12 days of Christmas. This was the time of the year when the sun was at its weakest, the nights were longest, and the earth itself seemed to be dying. In the minds of our ancestors, this specific astronomical alignment caused the veil between the world of the living and the realm of the dead to freeze, crack, and shatter. During these 12 nights, the dead were not confined to their graves. The wild hunt was the mechanism of this spectral overflow. But it wasn't a random stampede, it was a harvest. In Welsh mythology, the leader of the hunt was Cŵn Annwn, the king of the fairies and the lord of the underworld. Gwyn did not ride simply to cause terror. He was a psychopompa guide for the dead. His job was to sweep across the battlefields, the plague-ridden and the freezing moors to gather the souls of those who had died during the year and physically drag them into the afterlife. The hunt was a massive, terrifying funeral procession. The deafening noise, the barking hounds, and the blowing of the horns were meant to wake the newly dead and compel them to join the march. But as the centuries passed and the comforting structure of paganism was replaced by the rigid terror of medieval Christian purgatory, the meaning of this harvest mutated. The hunt was no longer a natural transition guided by a stern underworld king. It became a roaming prison. The riders were now believed to be the souls of the damned who had died with unconfessed sins, people who had committed suicide, or the spirits of unbaptized children. They were denied entry into heaven and refused by hell, forced to endure a perpetual, agonizing purgatory in the freezing upper atmosphere. The harvest was no longer a gathering. It was a punishment. When the peasants heard the hunt raging above their thatched roofs during the Christmas season, they weren't hearing gods or heroes. They were hearing the tortured screams of their own grandparents, friends, and lost children, endlessly running from hounds that never tire, chasing a prey they would never catch. The wild hunt became the ultimate symbol of spiritual despair, reminder that death was not a peaceful rest, but an exhausting, eternal nightmare. History often paints the wild hunt as a procession of hypermasculine Odin's howling warriors or Herne's brutal pack. But if you traveled through the snow-choked valleys of the Alps or the dense forests of southern Germany, the master of the sky was not a god or a king. It was a woman, and she was far more terrifying than any antlered phantom. To the Germanic peoples, she was known as Frau Holda, or in her darker, more violent aspect, Frau Pert. In the pagan era, she was a goddess of spinning, weaving, and the hearth, a matriarchal figure who oversaw the domestic life of women. But when winter descended, the kindly mother figure mutated into a nightmare. During the 12 days of Christmas, Perchta took to the skies, leading a chaotic procession known as the Pert. Unlike Odin's army of fallen heroes, Perchta's followers were deeply tragic. She led a host of the Heimchen, the lost souls of unbaptized infants, crying in the dark, tethered to her spectral chariot. But Perchta was not just a grieving mother. She was a ruthless enforcer of winter survival. In a medieval agricultural society, laziness was not a personality flaw. It was a threat to the community's survival. If a household had not finished spinning their winter flax, or if they had not properly cleaned their home by her feast day, Perchta would break into the house. According to the folklore, her punishment was visceral and horrific. She would slice open the bellies of the lazy, rip out their internal organs, and stuff their empty abdominal cavities with straw and rocks before sewing them back up. As Christianity solidified its grip on Europe, the Church realized they could not easily eradicate these powerful female entities. Instead, they weaponized them. Frau Holda, Perchta, and the Roman goddess Diana were explicitly named in early medieval texts as the leaders of the Society of Women, a heretical belief that women were flying out of their beds at night to join a demonic procession. The wild hunt of the pagan goddesses was slowly, deliberately, transformed into the witches' Sabbath. The terrifying image of women riding through the night sky, unbound by the laws of men, became the theological justification for the witch trials that would eventually burn thousands of women at the stake. The mother of the winter harvest was twisted into the bride of Satan, proving that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we invent to control each other. What do you do when the sky tears open? You are walking on a lonely dirt road. The wind dies down, and suddenly the deafening blast of a hunting horn shatters the silence. The hounds are baying, and the frantic drumming of hooves is closing in. How do you survive the wild hunt? The folklore provides a strict, terrifying set of rules. The most common and desperate tactic was to immediately throw yourself face down into the mud. You must press your body flat against the earth, cross your arms behind your neck, and close your eyes tight. You do not look up. To make eye contact with the riders was to invite madness, blindness, or immediate conscription into the horde. You had to make yourself as small and insignificant as possible, mimicking a corpse, hoping the storm of the dead would sweep over you without noticing your beating heart. But simply hiding was not always enough. The Wild Hunt was notorious for forcing mortals into macabre transactions. If you were caught standing at a crossroads, place where the veil between worlds is notoriously thin, the riders might demand your help. A spectral huntsman might drop the leashes of his massive, red-eared hounds and order you to hold them while he chases down a spirit. You had no choice but to obey, standing in the freezing dark, feeling the supernatural strength of the beasts pulling at your arms. When the huntsman returned, he would reward you for your service. The stories warn that this was the most dangerous moment of all. The rider might toss you a heavy, bloody haunch of meat supposedly from the game they just killed. But the folklore comes with a grim warning: do not hit it, and do not look at it until the sun rises. If you lacked the willpower and examined the meat in the dark, or worse, if you took a bite, you would seal your doom. When the morning light finally broke, the illusion would fade. The rich venison you were holding would revert to its true form: the rotting, severed leg of a human corpse, or sometimes the mutilated body of your own child, stolen from their crib while you were holding the devil's dogs. The hunt did not give gifts, it only laid traps, turning the basic human instinct of survival into a weapon against the mind. We like to think of ourselves as enlightened. We look back at the peasants throwing themselves into the mud to hide from ghost horses, and we smile at their ignorance. But our ancestors were not stupid. They were trying to survive in a hostile, unpredictable world, using the only frameworks they had. The Wild Hunt wasn't born from pure imagination. It was birthed from terrifying, physical realities. Imagine living in a world completely devoid of ambient light. When the sun went down in the 14th century, the darkness was absolute. Your only defense against the night was a flickering fire. Now, consider the phenomenon of migrating birds. Flocks of barnacle geese or pink-footed geese often migrate at night during the late autumn and early winter. If you have ever heard a massive flock of geese flying unseen in the pitch-black sky, you know it does not sound like birds. It sounds exactly like a pack of baying hounds, yelping and barking in chaotic unison, moving rapidly overhead. Combine that with the roar of a winter gale snapping the branches of ancient oaks, and your brain hardwired to find patterns in chaos will naturally construct the image of a screaming, airborne army. But auditory pareidolia only explains the sound. What explains the mass sightings, the people who swore they saw the riders, or the victims who fell into trances and believed they flew with them? The answer might lie in the soil. During the damp, freezing winters of northern Europe, rye crops were frequently infected with Claviceps purpurea, a toxic fungus known as ergot. Contains the psychoactive precursor to LSD. When peasants baked and ate bread made from infected rye, entire villages could suffer from ergot. The symptoms included severe burning sensations, muscle spasms, and profound, terrifying hallucinations. A family starving in the dead of winter, rationing their tainted bread, wouldn't know they were being poisoned. As the storm raged outside, the ergot would take hold. The wind would transform into shrieking ghosts. The shadows in the room would grow antlers. Sleep paralysis, combined with the cultural expectation of the Wild Hunt, would convince a victim that their soul was being dragged from their body to ride the winter winds. The terror was a biochemical reality. The Wild Hunt was a perfect storm of harsh weather, migrating animals, and accidental mass poisoning, proving that sometimes reality is far more terrifying than the myths we invent to explain it. We build our cities out of glass and steel. We illuminate the night with neon and halogen lights, pushing darkness to the very edge of our consciousness. We check the radar on our phones to see when a winter storm is approaching, reducing the atmospheric fury to a pixelated, colorful map. We tell ourselves that we have finally conquered the night, that our ancestors' ancient fears are merely the product of uneducated minds shivering from the cold. We don't believe in armies of ghosts. We don't believe in the Horned King. We don't believe in hell, but belief isn't necessary to feel the ancient, primal fear represented by the wild hunt. The hunt never truly disappeared. It simply retreated into the dense forests and the dark corners of our own psychology. Consider how you feel when the power goes out during a fierce winter blizzard. The sudden, eerie silence in your home. The way the wind howls against the glass sounds almost like a voice, almost like a warning. For a brief, terrifying moment, the illusion of our modern superiority is shattered, and we are transported back to the 12th century. We are reminded that we are small, weak, and completely at the mercy of forces we cannot control. The wild hunt is the ultimate expression of humanity's fear of an uncontrollable universe. It is the realization that nature is no benevolent mother. It is an indifferent, chaotic machine that can destroy us without a second thought. And while we may have stopped calling storms Odin or Herne, their psychological archetypes persist in our modern folklore. We still tell stories of unstoppable predatory forces swooping from the sky to abduct people in the middle of the night. We simply replace ghost horses with flying saucers, and fairy abductions with alien encounters. The core narrative remains exactly the same: an all-powerful non-human intelligence operating by its own incomprehensible rules, snatching us from our beds and stealing our time. The mythology of the hunt also persists in our deep anxiety about the collapse of society. The ghostly riders represent the collapse of order, the madness, the loss of individual identity, to a destructive collective frenzy. When we witness riots on the news, or when we feel the collective tension of a society on the verge of collapse, we are witnessing the psychological echoes of the wild hunt. It is the constant fear that civilization is but a very thin layer of ice on a very deep, dark ocean, and that at any moment that ice could crack. So, the next time you're driving alone on a dark, wooded road in the dead of winter, turn off your radio. Roll the window down, just a crack. Listen to the wind rustling through the bare branches. Listen to the deep, heavy silence that follows the gust. Notice how the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end, and how your foot instinctively presses the accelerator a little harder. That instinct is your DNA memory. It is the blood of your ancestors whispering a warning that has endured for 1,000 years. The fire is out. The hounds are loose. The riders are in the sky, and they are always searching for one more soul to join the darkness. Thank you for joining us in this dark history of the wild hunt. If this journey through folklore gave you chills, please give this video a like. It is the best way to support this channel and help these forgotten legends reach a wider audience. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been in nature, or caught in a storm, where you felt an overwhelming sense of dread as if the elements themselves were watching you? Share your story below. I read every comment. If you're interested in the dark and untold side of folklore, mythology, and history, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an investigation. See ya next time.